All right, so you saw how this chemical reaction of carbon dioxide plus water is giving us carbonic acid, except it needs, did you notice that? It needed an enzyme to make it happen. So that's the direction that we're going with all of this. Okay, and that's where I'm saying this here. Did you notice that this requires an enzyme to make it go faster? Okay. So, oops, sorry, technical difficulties here. All right. So here are a couple of thoughts that I want you to definitely understand. One is that I'm going to highlight this. It's not a bad idea, but you guys are going to write this. Energy is released or absorbed whenever chemical bonds are formed or broken. So we talked about how bonds hold energy. So energy can be released when they're broken or absorbed when they're formed. So this means that chemical reactions also involve changes in energy. Because, okay, chemical reactions are breaking bonds and making bonds, rearranging atoms. So if you're rearranging atoms and you're breaking and forming bonds, then obviously if you're formed or broken, this means that it's going to involve changes in energy because those bonds contain energy. So push pause. I want you to make sure you get this written in your notes. Energy is released or absorbed whenever chemical bonds are formed or broken. Very important. Okay, so push pause, get it written. Then when you're back, we got a little bit more too. We aren't quite done because I would like you to, let's make this visual. So we talked that chemical reactions can be formed or broken, but now we are going to talk about what happens with that. So chemical reactions that release energy versus chemical reactions that absorb energy. So what's the difference? What's happening with the energy in these? And what's happening is chemical reactions that give off energy are what we call spontaneous. And don't think that spontaneous means that it happens without energy or that it happens really fast. It just means it doesn't really take extra energy. And it doesn't necessarily mean that it happens fast. Because if you think about rust, rust is a spontaneous reaction of the metals being exposed to oxygen, and that turns into an oxide after a while, which is a rust. And this happens really slowly, but it's still spontaneous. It doesn't need an enzyme. It doesn't need extra energy to make it happen. But then we also have chemical, so that's if you're breaking the bond, if we're releasing energy, it's spontaneous. But there are some that aren't spontaneous. So chemical reactions that absorb the energy will not occur without energy. So in order to form those bonds, we need extra energy. So some chemical reactions require energy. So this is where we're going with this in biology. So in order, let me get back to my highlighter here so you can follow me. In order to stay alive, organisms need to carry out reactions that require energy. So every day we're doing chemical reactions in our body that need energy. So we need to eat. So obviously different organisms are going to get their energy from different things. Plants get their energy from the sun. Animals get their energy from consuming plants and animals. Okay, so now we've got that energy, and we store that energy in our cells, and eventually we're going to have to make some more chemical reactions. Okay, so chemical reactions, we're learning, don't always occur spontaneously, and that's a good thing. There's a reason for that. Otherwise, like for instance, the paper that you're writing on would just burst into flames because the cellulose, which just remember that's a polysaccharide, remember when we were learning that, is a plant material and it's indigestible and we make paper out of it. So anyway, the cellulose in your paper burns in the presence of oxygen to produce heat and light. However, paper burns only if you light it with a match first, because that gives it that first burst of energy it needs to make that reaction happen, get going. So when a chemical reaction needs that energy to get it going, that's what we call activation energy. So now let's go back a couple of pages, or back to our front page with the vocabulary, and let's fill in our definition for activation energy. So activation energy is the energy needed to get a reaction started. Now if you need to push pause to write that down, this would be a good time. Okay, so the energy needed to get a chemical reaction going is called the activation energy. And that makes sense. You know, when you activate something, you start it. And so it's the energy needed to get this going, get this chemical reaction going. So here's kind of what it would look like. If we were to draw this on a graph of some sort, like this one here, you'd see that here we're comparing how much energy the reaction needs, and this is where it's at along as it goes. So the chemical reaction is going in this direction. So you start out with your reactants, and we can't just go downhill to our products. It's going to take this much energy to get this reaction started. We call that the activation energy. So it's like in this picture, it's like this man having to push that rock up the hill. That takes energy. That rock is not going to go up the hill by itself. It takes energy supplied by the man. So the same thing, this reactant can't get going until it has this much energy to get it going. So once it gets up here, though, now it's all downhill. Now it doesn't require near as much energy, and it can happen pretty easily. Just like getting to the top of this hill with the rock, once it goes downhill, the rest of it can happen on its own. But it just needed that little bit to get it going first, and we call that activation energy. So there are many chemical reactions that are necessary for our survival. Would never happen on their own. So that, like I said, that rock is not going to roll itself over the hill. In order for our bodies to overcome this activation energy, to find this energy, to get over that hill, our cells make catalysts. Now, catalysts is a general term in chemistry. So catalysts can be used all over chemistry, not just in living things. And what they do is they lower the amount of energy needed for a reaction to happen. So let's go back and do another definition. Go back to your first page, and let's go down to catalyst. Once again, I am going to, let's see, for catalyst we've got a substance that speeds up the rate of a chemical reaction. Really what it does is it lowers that activation energy. It makes it easier for it to happen. So if you need to push pause to make sure everybody gets this written, go ahead and push pause. Otherwise, I'm going to keep rolling here, save some recording time. All right, so let's talk about how they lower the amount of energy needed for this reaction to happen. How many of you have ever eaten nuts? Like in the holidays, it's not like one of my favorites. Get a big bowl of nuts with a nutcracker, and then you crack them open and eat fresh nuts. So imagine if I would give you a walnut and just say, okay, break this open, get the nut inside. Without a tool, your hands probably aren't strong enough to do it alone. So to make it easier, we use a nutcracker, which is like a lever, right? So you put this nut in the right place, just situate it in the nutcracker, and then when you squeeze the handles, It takes a lot less energy for your hands to try to squeeze the handles to crack that shell than it does to try to crack that shell with your own bare hands, right? I think that's pretty logical. So it takes a lot less energy. That's lowering the activation energy to crack open that shell, kind of like lowering the activation energy to break a bond or form a bond. And so in this case, we're looking at this nutcracker like a tool, just like a catalyst is. The nutcracker would be like a catalyst. It's our tool for breaking open the nut. It makes it easier. So catalysts are like tools that make it easier for chemical reactions to happen. It doesn't take as much energy. Okay? So now let's apply that to life, not just catalysts in general in any chemical reaction. This is things that happen in our bodies. So when it's happening in our bodies, that's when we consider these catalysts, we call them enzymes. So enzymes are nature's catalyst. They make chemical reactions possible in our bodies by lowering the activation level. They're just like a tool. Just like I say here, they are like a tool to make it easier to make and break bonds. So you remember the video where you watched the carbon dioxide combine with the water to become carbonic acid? Well, if left to itself, this reaction is so slow that carbon dioxide would actually build up in your body faster than your bloodstream could remove it. But remember in the video there was that enzyme, it looked like kind of a big soft rock-like thing, and that those molecules kind of would stick right in the perfect place in that enzyme and it would push them together, and then so it made them stick together rather quickly. And that's really kind of how an enzyme works in nature too. Okay, so let's think about this. What do we know? All right, we know that some chemical reactions require energy. Okay, so breaking a bond might be like cracking open a nut. It's difficult to do without a tool. So we have that activation energy. We need that energy to get it going. So in order for that to happen, in order for us to survive, our bodies make enzymes that lower that activation energy. So essentially what they are is they're like a tool that make it easier for these chemical reactions to happen. But here's what happens. Enzymes are divas. They're super choosy. And I'm running out of time on my allotted recording time. So I'm just going to have you take a look at this and copy this down. How are enzymes so picky? Well, first of all, one thing that makes them very picky is that they'll only work with specific molecules. Very picky. They won't work with just anybody. It has to be just right. They only work at the right temperatures. If it gets too hot or too cold, they won't work anymore. And they only work at the right pH. If it's too acidic or too basic, they won't work either. And each enzyme is different. Some enzymes work with, one molecule, and it has to be a higher temperature in an acidic environment, and some of them work better in lower temperatures with a basic environment. It depends on the enzyme. Okay, so pause and write that. Then what I'd like you to do is take a look at the next video from the Amoeba Sisters.